Yeah. What would you say is the biggest rule that you have issues with? I wouldn't say like you personally have issues with, but you run into issues with when you're working with clients.
In banking in general, I would say there is a lot of issue around things like access and how you access things. So, for instance, if you have a certain type of credit card, you can only look at it through your online banking one way. And that's just because it's the way it was built. And there's other ways to do it, but because you're this type of customer, you're only allowed to look at it that way. And so there's a ton of instances like that where there's ways to make things more convenient for a customer, and banks just aren't doing it because that's just the way it is, and no one wants to make that change. So I would say
Okay.
things like that are probably the most common, or at least for me, they're the things that kind of like most irk me. I see a
Yeah.
reason behind requiring a business to be in business for a certain amount of time before you lend them money. I see reason behind requiring a balance to get a certain rate, things like that. But I don't see reason to make something more difficult for a customer because that's just the way it is when you have all of the ability to change it.
Yeah. Okay, so I actually have an interesting question. So let's say we're talking about a social media marketing company who has relatively stable reoccurring revenue, right? They're charging the monthly service and they know this is how much is going to come in next month. And they've only been in business for like year and a half.
Mm-hmm.
But the hard limit is, I don't know, what is the hard limit for years in business if you're trying to get a decent sized loan?
It depends, but most
Okay.
institutions they're gonna require 2 years in business before they look at you for lending, unless it's sometimes there's exceptions with like SBA lending and things like that, but a lot of the times
Yeah.
they'll require 2 years in business.
So would you even look at a company like that despite the fact that they have this really stable reoccurring revenue that you know they can pay it?
Yeah, so it depends on the institution, and
Mm-hmm.
without getting into specifics, because I'll be clear in saying that I am not a lender right now. So for me to say that yes, I would look at that, or yes, I wouldn't, or no, I wouldn't look at that, that wouldn't make sense because I'm not the person who looks at that. But I would say depending on the institution and depending on the banker, right? In my opinion, a good banker is going to look at everything. You know what I mean? There's never going to be a situation where someone's going to bring me their financials and say, I want a loan. And I'm going to say, how long have you been in business? If they tell me less than 2 years, I'm going to say, get out of here. That does not make sense. And
Mm-hmm.
that's not a sign of a good banker. So if there's a banker doing that to you or anyone out there, I would say, shop around for your bankers, find someone who's really going to look at your stuff. Because for me, I think it makes sense to at least explore every option. I was always taught in banking to never make no the final answer. It's always no, and here's what we can do to change that. And so, I think a good banker would always look at that situation and explore all the options that are out there. I've also seen some crazy Hail Mary loans go out the door that I personally thought, oh, man, maybe this might not happen. And then it goes through. So that's always a great feeling too.
Yeah, absolutely. I know. I'm gonna have to start looking at loans for like housing and stuff because I'm getting to that age where I probably should start buying things if I want to get into real estate investing. So I know I was looking at loans and talking to people just to kind of get ahead of the game and figure out what's going on. And one consensus that I found from basically half the real estate agents I've talked to is talk to the smaller banks. They'll do a better job of finding something that works for you.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. I think that more localized outfits, like I said, they tend to have more ability to make things comprehensive and kind of customize things for the person they're working with. Whereas, yeah, I mean, if you're working with a huge mortgage lending bank that does tons of mortgages every single week, they're probably not going to care if they don't get one mortgage. And so they're
Yeah.
looking for really, really prime situations, whereas smaller banks are going to understand, if there's something happening, they're going to understand the situation and a way to work around it most of the time.
Yeah. I know Josh was a huge advocate of this when I was talking to him. Josh from Next Home.
Oh,
And
yeah.
his favorite bank was Pineries. I think it's partly just because it's literally right across the street from him.
Yeah.
But he was like, yeah, I mean, they're one of the best banks because they won't look at your income. They'll look at the business's statements and how much you could be making as income.
Right. Yeah.
Because that's a really big thing for entrepreneurs.
Right. And yeah, that's a huge plus. And I'll say every bank probably does their underwriting a little differently, but there's certain banks that actually underwrite their own loans in-house. So like their bankers will actually underwrite the loan. And that's a plus too if you're finding yourself getting trouble, lending conventionally under, regular underwriting terms.
Yeah.
I will say you're in a tough spot to start doing residential lending right now.
Yeah.
I mean, timing wise, it's not ideal, but it's a fluid number, so it'll change.
I mean, the market's starting to get better, kind of.
Yeah, kind of. Things are slowing down a little bit. You see it. The rates are starting to drop a little bit, so we'll see where it goes, definitely. But I think that if we've ever been in uncharted territory, it's now. So everyone's kind of on their toes, waiting to see what's going to happen.
Yeah, I see. There's like half the real estate agents in my LinkedIn feed are like, I just sold 5 more houses. And the other half are like, I'm drowning. Please help.
Yeah.
So it's really like, it's a rough spot right now. It's really a rough spot.
I think especially for real estate agents, you kind of have to find a niche market to work in right now. It's not like it was, in 2020, 2021, where you just had people just beating down your door to buy houses and everyone was kind of flooding into this market of property management. And, there were, I think, real estate investment businesses popping up every third day just to get in while the rate was low,
I know one thing that I think is coming back, especially in real estate, is a very a personable realtor. Like Amy Lesniak from the Legacy Group. It's a really small, I want to say 4 or 5 realtors that just all work together.
Oh, sure.
She has a very personable brand of her brand is her.
Yeah.
Like she will do everything she can for you. She will try to help you out. And that's how it is. And she seems to be doing really well. So having that brand of I'm here, I'm one of you seems to be doing really well.
Yeah, and I think a lot of industries are coming back to that. I think that obviously that went away during the pandemic. Everything was hands off, everything was digital, and that was really the focus. Nobody was really focused on making touch, but you see that everywhere. I actually go back and visit some of my old colleagues at some of the other banks that I've worked at in the past, US and a couple other ones, and it's funny because working for a smaller outfit, they're always really focused on getting out, being involved in the community, going and visiting your businesses. And that's kind of always how Incredible Bank's been. When I first came into US Bank, it was December of 2020. And so it was like the height of the pandemic scare and no one was going out and visiting anybody. And it stayed that way for a long time. Well, it's funny because now when I go back and I talk to some of my old colleagues and I talk to them about some of the expectations that they have, or some of the changes that have happened since I've left, one of the things that they're doing now is even these big banks are starting to incentivize their bankers that have traditionally just been in the branch to open accounts and run transactions to get out in the community and go do flyer drops or go buy cookies and drop them off at 3 businesses and start to do these touches. So you see this on a macro level kind of across the business world as a whole. I think businesses are starting to shift their focus back to, okay, now we have to start creating those personal touches again, which I love to see. The pandemic was tough for me.
It's everywhere. I mean, that's part of the reason podcasts are coming back, I think.
Yeah.
Because you saw this really big uptick in podcasts, including this one, of people who are doing something that's more authentic. Whereas the Instagram reels, the TikToks are all hyper processed. Mm-hmm. Whereas this is very personal.
Absolutely. Yeah. You get some of the outtakes and things like that. Yeah. 100%. I think that authenticity is selling a lot more than it ever has. So yeah, I agree with you.
Speaking of personal, Chris, you had a kid in the last year.
I did. Yeah.
And I wanted to ask you, I honestly, I just wanted to ask kind of what's changed? What are your struggles?
So much has changed. Everything changes when you have a kid, right? So, I mean, it was something that we were well prepared for. I'm just naturally kind of neurotic person. So when I found out my wife was pregnant, it was like go time from the day we found out. I was prepping, building a nursery and getting everything ready. We were stockpiling baby supplies from the moment we found out. And so that was really helpful in the long run, just to help calm a lot of my anxiety around becoming a father for the first time. But yeah, nothing can really prepare you for what, when that change actually occurs. It's such a shift in everything you do on a daily basis and just your thought process through everything. You consider this new person now in every single aspect of your life. And, it's easy to be selfish when you don't have that person there. And it's nice to be able to be selfish sometimes as well, but yeah, it's definitely a shift. You absolutely lose that. And your main focus just becomes creating safety around this human. And it's a big helpless feeling too. I don't think a lot of people touch on that, but it's a very helpless feeling being a parent, especially when things don't go as planned. I don't know if I told you this just in conversation or in passing at all, but there were a couple medical issues that we had with Beck right after he was, well, not right after, when we started feeding him purees. We found out that he has a food allergy. And so he has a condition called FPIES, which is a delayed food allergy. And he has trigger foods that are peanuts and eggs and corn and things like that. And we didn't know that. So we had a really scary episode. We had to call 911. An ambulance had to come pick him up and bring him to the hospital. And it was just an absolute terror. And throughout all of that, it's like you really realize how much you are not the expert when stuff like that happens, and how much you have to rely on and trust other people. And so that's something that I was not used to doing. Yeah, big shift, but it's been crazy.
One of the other things that I think people realize with having a kid, and on the same note with like the medical issues, is people are fragile. Like, you have no idea. I think every single teenager, every single person in probably their early 20s is like, I'm invincible. I can go hop on a motorbike and go like 140 down the freeway.
Yeah.
But then you get to that age and you start seeing these kids and you're like, oh, I'm just one of those grown up. I'm just as fragile.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's a huge realization.
Yeah, 100%.
Huge one.
I think that's something Oh, go ahead, please.
No, you can go.
I was just going to say, I think that's something that I started to realize in my my middle age, I would say. When I got out of my 20s, for sure, I started to realize that some of the things that I used to do when I was younger that didn't scare me at all now terrified me. Like, I'm a lot more jumpy in a car. I'm a lot more of a careful driver now, especially now that I have, a backseat passenger. I used to make fun of my mom all the time for driving slowly. And now I'm so much worse than she is in a car. And I'm so much more panicky. If I see someone like start to go at a stop sign, I'm already in panic mode, slamming on my brakes. And that's one of the things definitely that kind of drove that exact point home for me is, some of the things that I used to do that never scared me before now are just terrifying to think about,
Yeah. It's so weird. Like, I just seeing people have kids and you're like, oh, like that's interesting. Never would have thought that one.
Yeah. Absolutely.